solve a quadratic equation by factoring. First of all, quadratic equations are second-degree equations. So you're going to get more than one answer. You're going to get two answers. You could get one, you could get none. If you have a perfect square trinomial, for example, you get one answer. You could also get the empty set if, in fact, it doesn't factor if you can't solve it using a quadratic formula. There's always that possibility. But for the most part, you're going to end up with two answers anytime you solve a quadratic equation. So let's take a look at an example. I want to solve this quadratic equation. I want to solve 12x squared is equal to 35 minus x. And we're going to go ahead and solve that quadratic equation, and we're going to solve it by factoring. Okay. First of all, you'll notice that quadratic equations in standard form are in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. That's the standard form of a quadratic equation. When you want to solve them, you can solve them by factoring, you can solve using the quadratic formula, you can solve them using the square root method, you can solve them using completing the square. These three you must be able to use here. Not worried about this. This is usually involving circles and spheres and things. We're not worried about that. But that is a fourth way to solve a quadratic equation. You may have done that when you were in high school. Okay? Well, we're going to solve this one by factoring. When you're going to solve a quadratic equation by factoring, step number one, make sure it is in standard form, which is ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. This is not in standard form. And this is not in standard form. To put it in a standard form, it's got to look like this. I'm going to leave my 12x squared right where it is. I'm going to bring my negative x across the equality. So I'm going to add x to both sides. I'm going to go and bring the 35 over, so I have to subtract 35. When I subtract 35 and I add x, I'm left with 0 over here. That's what you want to do. You want to get it set equal to 0. You want to make sure it's in standard form. That's step number one. Now, could I have brought the 12x squared over here and made it negative 12x squared? Absolutely. I don't think it's a good idea to try to factor something with a negative lead coefficient. Not a good idea. Right? So we're going to solve it the way it is right here. Now, I've got a trinomial. Trinomials are going to factor into two binomials if there are no common factors to take out. Well, I've got a 12, a 1, and a 35, so there are no common factors. So if this is going to factor, it has to factor into two binomials. Okay? So we've got two binomials. Now, step number one, we want to make sure we've got it in standard form. Step number two, and this is the key to these. This is the absolute key, is factoring these. Well, factors of 12 are 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. The factors of 35 are 1 and 35 and 7 and 5. I need to come up with a combination. I know one thing for sure, both my signs have to be different because the middle sign is positive and the last sign is going to be negative. Well, I'm going to go ahead and, once again, when you're going to factor, most of it is trial and error. Okay? We've got three sets of factors. 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. I'm going to try 3 and 4. I'm going to try 3x and 4x. Factors of 35 are 1 and 35, 7 and 5. I'm going to try 7 and 5, and it makes a big difference where you put the 7 and where you put the 5. I need to come up with a difference of 1 in the middle. So that means that the 7 has to go here, and the 5 has to go here, because 3 times 7 is 21, 5 times 4 is 20, 21 minus 20 is going to give me 1. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, then you better get some help. Okay, because I mentioned before, that's why I had it on the prerequisite. That's why I gave it to you again for today. You have to be able to factor. Okay? Now, I need a positive x in the middle, positive 1. So I need a positive here, and I need a negative here, because 3 times positive 7 is 21. Negative 5 times 4 is negative 20. Positive 21 minus 20 gives me the positive 1. So this is factored. Step number 3. We're going to set each factor equal to 0. We'll set each factor equal to 0. Now, factors are the two things that are multiplied by one another. So here I've got 3x minus 5 is equal to 0. 4x plus 7 is equal to 0. Step number 4, we're going to solve the resulting linear equations. And you'll notice there are two-step linear equations here. Here I'm going to add 5, so I've got 3x is equal to 5. X is equal to 5/3. Here I'm going to subtract 7. 4x is equal to negative 7, and x is equal to negative 7/4. Those are the two answers to that quadratic equation, and we solved it by factoring. So again, step number 1, make sure it's in standard form. Step number 2, and this is the key, make sure you factor it. Step number 3, set each factor equal to 0. And lastly, solve the resulting linear equations, and that will give you the two answers for your quadratic equation.